When my grandmother was still alive and when I was younger, and I would walk her property in a rural part of Texas, I was always struck by this babbling water that just came up from the ground. It was a wellspring. It was the start of a creek. And sometimes, for whatever reason, and it was unexplainable by our eyes, there would be an excess of this fresh water seeping through the sandy layers of the earth, pressing forth to see daylight. And unfortunately, sometimes this would cause problems, such as flooding her dam. The dam is flooded again. And there was no way to control it. But for the most part, it was just this babbling little. And going to see it in person was special because it was this phenomenon that you couldn't really harness, that you couldn't control, that was a source of life, a source of abundance, and sometimes a source of hassle. My grandmother, not knowing exactly what to do with it, other than damming and creating a lake for us to enjoy the sunsets together. And she would enjoy the sunset on her lake probably every night for 40 years. And the sunsets were beautiful there in the wide open Texas sky. And if you've ever been to Texas, the big sky is a central feature of it. And it was away from light pollution. The energy there was very rhythmic with cicadas in the summer and dirt roads and quiet neighbors. And the wellspring effect, the fountainhead, is a beautiful analogy of what it means to be connected to Source. And it is one of the pinnacles of abundance that those that are creative types, those who are artists, channelers, mystics, occultists, even just explorers of the unknown, being connected to the fountainhead of creation, of the essence of divinity, is a special, special type of relationship. And the best way to cultivate it is by being in flow. So, for example, I receive a word or a title for every episode, sometimes a phrase. And I practice actually going into meditation before I make each episode. And I try to download little bits of wisdom. And then when I make the episode, and this is why my pace is sometimes a little strange or slow, I lay down, I close my eyes. Well, first, I turn off all of the lights except for 2 rock salt lamps. And I lay down in a pseudo meditation, meaning I'm not completely under, but I'm sort of halfway in between. And I allow space between my thoughts and my words to receive and to express. And so when I received this episode title, it was actually 2 weeks ago. Normally when I receive it, I like to talk about it that night, but I had trouble receiving from the fountainhead of creation. I had a little bit of difficulty. The only thing that came up was this image of my grandmother's property, which is now gone. She sold it before she passed. And I didn't understand who it was supposed to help or what the purpose was. And usually I get a sense of what the takeaway message is and I can craft my message accordingly. So this is working hand in hand with the essence of the beyond and with my own experience, my own personal touch on it, to create something meaningful, inspiring, or helpful, and at the very least, authentic for you. And what's interesting is that I had some resistance to talking about this, and I'm not sure why. But this is where resistance actually hinders your connection to source, your connection to creativity. Because when you are a vehicle for bringing the other worlds into your world, when you are being a receiver or an antenna, some people say that it's helpful to just be a pure open channel. I believe that that is impactful and meaningful, but it's another experience entirely to fuse yourself with the message, to craft a signature in tandem with the divine. And not everybody teaches this. And so one of the ways that we hinder that connection is that we try to make it make sense. And this is what I did with this message, where I resisted it because I was like, I don't get it. Like, what am I talking about? Okay, I'm going to open with this image that I have in my mind, but then after that, where do I go? And it was blank. It was just absolutely blank. And so I meditated on it again, blank, and again, blank. And I was like, okay, I'm going to talk about something else that I have a better idea about, that I have a better understanding about. And I'm going to circle back to this one. Again, blank. And tonight, I queued up in my mind, this is the hindrance part, I queued up in my mind a different episode that wasn't the right episode, but that made sense for my mind. You see, I was approaching the creation from my headspace, from strategy, I was going to talk about observations that I see in my personal life and in the collective, and then talk about a lesson that I've learned and share that. And although that is wisdom, it's a different energy stamp. And I decided to do something different and to let it actually be mostly empty and unknown, and to challenge myself to not have the key pieces that I normally do, because I normally get some sense of the structure, and the empty spaces are maybe like, 60-40. So 40% structure, 60% empty space. But this one was like 90% empty space, 10% structure. And this is the hindrance part of where, when you are staying in your comfort zone, when you are creating from the place that you've always known and created from, let's say you're a painter or an artist or photographer, and when you use the same setup, the same process, you can get into flow, right? And it's a little uncomfortable to step outside of your normal. But what happens is that you start to open up something different, and you challenge yourself in a new way that then pushes you out of that familiarity, which deepens your trust in the creative process and expands your skills in sometimes unique ways. And for those of you who are used to creating art with the divine intelligence, and I've heard from some of you, so I know that that you're listening, my recommendation is to play with it even further and to examine where you might be hindering yourself in an unknown way. And so working with a new medium, working with a new setup, working in a new location. Some of you have a little bit of dust on you that needs to be shaken off. And there's a resistance to shaking off that dust because you have the recipe for success. But you're being called to move. I'm almost seeing a meadow, like somebody in an easel in a meadow. And you're being called to do something different, to actually use your gifts and apply them in a different way. I'm seeing a mural, a wall, and expressing yourself in that mural differently because there's a resonance, there's a vibration that is your style, is your signature, but there's another level of expressivity that when you allow for the creativity to flow through your palms, your fingertips, and you're not hindered by the dust or the cobwebs of how you think it's supposed to be, or you feel trapped because you're well known as an artist. It's time. It's time to move into a different sphere. And for those of you who don't know what it's like to be connected to the fountainhead and who feel that you're seeking purpose, the best way to approach this relationship is to offer yourself and to be of service and to actually ask in meditation your guides, however you communicate with the other side. And everybody has different techniques for this. If you're not familiar with that, you can literally sit in meditation and speak in your mind and set the intent and the manifestation energy and the will to create this relationship. And what it feels like is that it feels like an abundance of ideas that at first may trickle in. And so let's say that you want to take up a new hobby or you want to make content and you're worried about running out of ideas. I was worried about that at some point. Then what you want to do is you want to invite the source, the divine intelligence, whatever your name is, whatever placeholder. You want to invite that into your working arena, into your daily meditation, and ask for inspiration, ask for ideas. And imagine, if you're a visualizer, not everybody is, imagine that there's a faucet that you open up. And when you open that up, you receive ideas or messages or pieces. And the way people receive these bits of information is different. So be open to receiving it in a variety of different forms. Some people have very, very vivid imaginations and visualizations, and so they can easily picture things in their mind. Some people have more clear cognizance where it's just this understanding. And some people are really great at connecting the dots and seeing patterns and can get ideas from just observing the world and connecting things a little bit differently, seeing things a little bit differently. Other people have a stream, like a flood of thoughts that they furiously write down. It could be like one weekend. You set aside a weekend to receive your downloads. You create the space. You go into flow. You go into meditation, and you can combine this with journaling. And you just let the ideas flow through your hands, and you could have the next masterpiece for a novel that you then write. So everybody's approach is a little bit different. One of my favorite approaches is actually to start with nothing and to create something. So a long time ago, when I was practicing this, gosh, that's been a really long time ago, I would go into a trance, and I used cannabis at that time to help facilitate that because I didn't know what meditation was. I was clueless. And then I would listen to music that had a particular vibe and frequency. And I would start with a lump of clay, and I would just start sculpting. And I didn't know what I was going to make. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a class. I didn't have training. I didn't have anybody, and I did it in the garage. I didn't have anybody's influence except for me, the trance, my hands, the music, and the connection to source. And I was surprised sometimes at what came out. I would try this with painting, but I would get in my head a little bit and critique it as I was going along. And that kind of takes away from the process. If you are critiquing, if you are judging, you're not at the fountainhead. You're not in flow. You are in the headspace. You are in the conditioned reality that culture and society is attempting to impose on you. And it takes practice to speak or to do without criticism. And that's why I encourage you to work alone at first, because the influence of other people in the room when you're trying this may be too much, especially if you care about their opinion and if they happen to be very nosy. But it is powerful to be able to perform in front of other people and to maintain that connection. If you're ready for it, that's kind of like advanced mode. So that is a source of abundance in of its own right that you can then pull into the material world to change people's lives, to inspire people, to help them laugh. To bring a little levity is a gift in of itself. Like, some people are amazing comedians, and you can channel your set or jokes if you are a comedian. And what that does is that it allows the ability to touch people's hearts, to change people's minds, to widen the sphere of influence, of positivity, assuming that you're channeling light, helpful things. There are those that channel other entities, and that has its own sphere and its own merits. I'm not discussing that at this time. But ideally, you are bringing in something that you are proud of in the world, that has a purpose. And so by intentionally connecting with different fountainheads, and there are different fountainheads, you can become almost a representative of source embodied and infuse that into your intellectual works, into business. I know some people that I met actually in business that have the gift of speech that just will all of a sudden start turning it on, and you can feel that it's coming from some other place. And they have the ability to inspire and to influence. So you're not confined to the arts or to painting or music. When you are in tune and connected with this fountainhead, and very often it comes through the creative expression, and that very often comes through the creative arts side of our world. But when you're in tune with it, you can apply it anywhere, absolutely anywhere. And you could be sitting in a park, talking to somebody, and I had this experience recently, and channeling and giving them advice to listen to their body. And in particular about a relationship and a decision that they were making. And just reminding them that the body always knows first. And I could feel that they needed that. They were young. They were teenage years. And they needed that. And that's what I mean by you can always be connected to the fountainhead and influence somebody's life in a perfect serendipitous moment.